What's going on, guys? Happy MLK Day to all of you, and thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Incline Dodgers podcast. We are presented by TickPick and Fansided. Kevin Klein speaking, joined by Jake Reiner, and we're so pumped and thrilled to be joined by the best reporter and coverage. You can find him over at The Athletic, where he gives you the best insight to your Los Angeles Dodgers. We are joined by Fabian Ardaya today, who has just been crushing it for the last few years now, and especially this offseason, bringing you insane Roki Sasaki coverage, hit the Tanner Scott news, and has been covering the Dodgers since 2021. Is that right, Fabian?
Yep, since 2021, yep.
Well, thank you for joining us. So, Fabian, how has the offseason been treating you? Obviously, you got to cover a World Series championship Dodgers team, and that must have been a blast all the way through the end of October. And the Dodgers have just been knocking it out of the park with huge free agency signings. Blake Snell, Roki Sasaki, Tanner Scott the other day, amongst other moves, bringing back Teoscar Hernandez, Blake Trinan, Tommy Edman extension. So, just wanted to get your thoughts on just the last 12 months or so covering the Dodgers since that Shohei Ohtani signing.
Yeah, the last couple off seasons have been quite busy. This isn't quite the $1 billion off season, but I think I was trying to add up like how much new money the Dodgers have added. It's $500 million at this point, and obviously they were in on Juan Soto, so like they've been very busy the last couple of off seasons, especially. It seems like, especially with how things are lined up for financially for the Dodgers going forward, all the business opportunities, especially the opportunities that Shohei Ohtani brings, like they are lined up to be well positioned and be active and aggressive in free agency, and they've shown it.
Yeah. So, Jake, we've been hit by some big moves the last couple of days. Tanner Scott yesterday morning, Roki Sasaki a couple of days before that. Wanting both your guys' thoughts. We had heard that the Dodgers were in on Tanner Scott, but I was actually surprised they were willing to go up there to 4 years, $72 million, because with the exception of Kenley Jansen, we haven't seen them commit this big of a salary to a relief pitcher in Tanner Scott. So clearly, if they were willing to go up there, Friedman must have been very high on this guy.
Yeah, definitely. I think.
Yeah, I mean they.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Fabian. There's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah, I mean, the Dodgers just don't historically spend on relievers. I mean, that's sort of one of those things that they've, throughout time, shown an ability to sort of find the Evan Phillipses of the world, to be able to find an Anthony Bonda like last year, Ryan Brazier like the year before, and not really shell out. I know, obviously, last year they were able to bring back Ryan Brazier, but the fact that they were able to bring back Blake Trinan and go out and get Tanner Scott, it was definitely a different sort of mode, but I think the Dodgers are kind of operating a little bit differently now than they were even before that, because they know they kind of have the license to be aggressive in spending, even more so than in years past, just considering where they're at, what this window looks like, all the different business opportunities that have come their way. And also, I mean, they've found a way to sort of maximize the position that they're in, whether it comes to how they structure these contracts. They know that they have these players that are willing to defer money, especially because some of these stars already have when it comes to Ohtani, Betts, Freeman. They've done it. So it makes it easier for some other guys to want to play there and be willing to defer money to go there. So that, combined with the fact that obviously Tanner Scott was looking to sort of get into this range of years and money, and there weren't a lot of teams that were willing to go to that range, that didn't go to that range. Sort of look at, obviously the Cubs were the runners up there. They weren't able to go there when it came to the total amount of dollars. The Mets were involved in the mix, but then they pivoted late and they went and added AJ Minter. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was a matter of the Dodgers kind of waiting out the rest of this market, but also he was their priority A when it came to relief pitching outside of Blake Trinan this winter. And obviously, while they did their due diligence with other guys like Devin Williams, like this was their plan.
So I'm really excited about this bullpen. I think that it is possibly even better than last year's bullpen, which was pretty elite. You look at who they've assembled in this bullpen, and all of these guys like Tanner Scott and Blake Trinan and Evan Phillips and all these guys have closing experience. But the way that Dave Roberts kind of deployed this bullpen last year was very much by committee, even though Evan Phillips kind of held down the closer role for a good amount of time. But when the playoffs rolled around, it was kind of all hands on deck. And then Blake Treinen kind of became the de facto closer. With Tanner Scott getting this big 4-year, $72 million deal, certainly closer money, where do you see him fitting into this bullpen, Fabian? Do you believe that Dave Roberts is kind of going to name him a closer, or not name a closer at all and kind of keep it how it is?
I think he's going to keep things how they are. And I think you sort of saw last year with how the Padres used Tanner Scott. Like, they used him, especially in that DS, they would use him in the 4th inning, the 6th inning, the 8th inning. It just mattered the matchups. I think Tanner Scott's shown an ability where he can sort of do that. I think that's part of why he was such a good fit also. It's just the fact that he's shown an ability to be kind of used specifically to deploy against certain guys and certain spots. He has closing experience, can close out a game when needed. I think there's also a knowledge, like, so much of this team, obviously some of the injuries, stuff like that, there isn't as much wear and tear for some of them when it comes to like some of these arms in terms of how many innings they threw last year. But the bullpen was used a lot last year over the course of the summer just to get to October. And obviously through October, you're running them in bullpen games multiple times. Guys are coming back healthy outside of Brusdar Graterol, but like there's still going to be some residual wear and tear, I'm sure. There's going to be some of that where you feel that, especially with such a short off season, with how early the Dodgers season starts this year with Tokyo. Having a guy who didn't really go through the full October, who is as elite as Tanner Scott has been the last couple of years, that's the added benefit where you have a guy that maybe is a little bit fresher than some of the other bullpen arms you have.
Definitely makes sense to me. So Roki Sasaki was the big name, pretty much the theme of the entire month of January. And we had definitely gotten word that this was a guy the Dodgers were prioritizing once he was posted. And then after he was posted, the multiple meetings, they wanted to obviously have a future with Roki Sasaki. And Roki Sasaki wanted to have a future in Major League Baseball because he came to the States a couple years early, sacrificing anywhere from 250 to 300 million range of future money if he had waited it out. So you did a phenomenal job, and I highly recommend our listeners, if they haven't read your pieces yet on The Athletic, covering everything that went down with Roki Sasaki. So I wanted to get a little more insight, kind of the last few days. Did it ever feel like the Dodgers may have lost some confidence, or from what you heard, they always felt like they were in a prime position to land Roki Sasaki, and they just had to kind of do the due diligence and let the process play itself out as he met with the Padres, who fell out 3rd place, and then the Blue Jays, who made a strong push in the end?
Well, the Dodgers did get the last word. They were the last meeting there, so it depends on sort of how you feel about that, whether like you feel confident knowing that you have the last word with the guy, or if you're just wondering if that means you're 3rd in the rankings. Obviously, the Dodgers were pretty optimistic throughout. I think they kind of knew what their selling point was, and they felt like it hammered home on what Roki Sasaki said he wanted, which is to get better, to figure out how it get his velocity back to where it was a year ago, and try to figure things out. Obviously, there are some questions about the Dodgers pitching development the last year or so when they talk about like a self-audit when it comes to trying to figure out some of the sources of some of the injuries last year. But plain and simple, they are really good at getting velocity out of guys, and they are really good at getting guys to be effective at the big league level when they are healthy. So that's why it made a lot of sense as a fit. I think the last week or so, obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty just because you don't really know where his head is at, what he's sort of looking for. They sort of knew that like they were landing contingencies in place no matter what. They kind of put their international signing on hold, but also had some deals. At least the Phillies deal was lined up, ready to go in case Roki Sasaki chose the Dodgers. Obviously, they kind of knew that even as the Blue Jays were trading for Miles Straw and getting international bonus space then too. So they kind of knew that every team was kind of just positioning themselves just in case. Obviously, the Blue Jays went and did it before he actually signed it. They actually signed Sasaki. But yeah, they kind of felt optimistic enough throughout their position. And I think there was probably some relief, but I don't know how much surprise there was once he officially announced.
I want to go back to something you talked about in the piece you wrote, kind of on the inside story on how Roki Sasaki came to the Dodgers. And you mentioned that he brought up his velocity being down as one of the questions that he wanted to ask these organizations on what their plan is for him velocity wise. Can you kind of take us a little bit more insight on that? Just about, what does that say about a player like Roki Sasaki? Obviously a very young pitcher, but that he was very much focused on the pitching side of things as opposed to kind of maybe the glitz and glamour that the Dodgers could provide.
Yeah, obviously reporting that story out with some of the other colleagues at the Athletic, like Dennis Lin, Patrick Mooney, Will Salmon, and Ken Rosenthal, like speaking to some of the executives there was kind of two different directions that went. There was a direction where it's like, oh, this is really smart. You want to gather as much information as possible. They kind of give some insight into like what he cares about, his dedication to his craft. And I think there's also some of it where like there's a little bit of skepticism. Like, all right, you're not asking about the city or how you'll fit in. You're just caring about this homework assignment, which like it sort of depends on like obviously how you look at sort of who had meetings, everything like that. But yeah, I think there's definitely something to glean in terms of like he cares about doing things, cares about his craft, cares about being the best, and that's sort of the thing that at least he sort of said when he was initially posted. It's something that Andrew Friedman said when Sasaki got posted initially. Like he said that he wants to be the best player in the world, and the Dodgers feel like they can make that happen. So that's why I think the Dodgers feel like they're well positioned to make that kind of specific pitch, just because they've done a really good job when it comes to velocity. I think it was a couple of years ago that they had AA staff at the highest velocity of any pitching staff in baseball. Obviously, a lot of those guys have gotten hurt since then, but they're really good at getting to that first part, which is getting the velocity.
So correct me if I'm wrong. The expectation right now is best case scenario for Shohei returning to the Dodgers rotation would be sometime in May. So with the addition of Sasaki and Snell this offseason, you're looking at those three, Yamamoto and Glasnow, and hopefully that's your solid five. He's not officially with the Dodgers yet, but the expectation is Clayton Kershaw will re-sign with the Dodgers probably in spring training when they're able to open up some 40-man roster spots. And then it's just kind of a mix and match with the other guys like Tony Gonsolin, Landon Knack, Bobby Miller, if he can return to form. And then I don't know if you have any clue what the plan is with Dustin May. I don't think we've had any confirmation if the Dodgers view him as still as a starter or they might shift him into a type of reliever role. But then you got Ben Kasparius as well, who will have some type of capacity. So does it kind of feel like the Dodgers may have too many names in the mix and we could see them move a guy or two? Or do you think they're just going to roll with this depth?
Well, Dodgers are going to go 6-man from the start of the season. I think they're going to go 6-man rotation no matter what, full season, just because Yamamoto has never pitched on anything other than 6 days rest. Ohtani has always been part of a 6-man rotation. Sasaki, same thing. And I'm sure that's part of the Dodgers' pitch. Is like we are already planning on doing a 6-man rotation, whether you're here or not. We are set up to do this for you. So yeah, they'll be in a position where I think probably to start the season it'll be sort of like you mentioned, the guys you mentioned with Snell, Glasnow, Yamamoto, Sasaki, the other guys you mentioned. Also, Dustin May will be in that mix as a starter. There's no reason not to stretch him out this spring and just sort of see where he's at physically. Spring's the time to stretch guys out anyway. It's just because it's easier to do that and make a guy shorter, make him a reliever, as opposed to vice versa. So, yeah, I mean, that's sort of going to be the plan. Obviously, there's a lot of moving pieces that can go up and down when it comes to options and stuff like that. Dustin May is not one of those guys, but Tony Gonsolin is. Bobby Miller is. Like there's going to be able to find ways to mix and match. And I think having a 6-man rotation and understanding that when Ohtani is healthy, which you're right, it'd probably be, I think the soonest he'll be in a rotation sometime in May, just considering, look at like Walker Buehler's timeline last year, for example, is sort of a good comparison for workload and stuff like that. But when Ohtani's there, you're kind of knowing that you have a free roster slot, especially for a pitcher, because Ohtani's not counting towards your 13 pitcher maximum. So.
Fabian, what are your thoughts on for the rest of the offseason for the Dodgers? Kevin kind of mentioned a little bit about, moving guys to the 60-day IL to free up roster spots for, the likes of Clayton Kershaw, maybe even Kike Hernandez. We've heard a lot of fans are clamoring for Kike to stay with the team. I think us included. We would like to see him back. What are you hearing on Kike Hernandez and just kind of the rest of the way this roster is going to fill out.
Yeah, I think there is more of a fit there now that they did trade Gavin Lux, cleared up a little bit of that logjam there. Obviously, Kike Hernandez is still free agent, still obviously a lot of interest from contenders and stuff like that. And he's a guy who fits just about every team just because of how many different positions he plays. And I think teams value what he brings in October. I mean, he does fit this Dodgers team. It's just a matter of, okay, what piece goes out in that sort of way. And like they are still in a position where Chris Taylor's in the last year of his contract. They're kind of figuring some stuff out. But as of right now, I feel like the major dominoes maybe that are left, if any, are maybe seeing if Kike Hernandez fits, figuring out the details on Clayton Kershaw's return because he will be back. So it's those two, and that's about it for right now. Obviously, there are still some other stuff that can come up. You never know if the guy's market kind of dries up. Makes a lot of sense, sort of like Freddie Freeman signing last year, a couple years ago. So yeah, you never know when the right opportunity pops up. But that's sort of the main things they're kind of looking at right now, and obviously at some point this spring, figuring out an extension when it comes to Dave Roberts.
So I'm going to kind of go back to the start of the offseason with this question. The Dodgers proved, I think, to a lot of skeptics that they were able to win a full 162 game season, and they did it pretty convincingly this 2024 World Series. What do you think was the motivation? And, there's a lot of other franchises out there that just don't have the commitment to winning, such as the Los Angeles Dodgers. What do you think it was within this franchise that didn't have the complacency, went out there, added a Blake Snell, was aggressive in re-signing Teoscar Hernandez and the other names we've talked about, Tanner Scott? So what do you think kind of separates the Dodgers from the other teams that are kind of just floating around?
To a certain, like, this is a cop-out answer, but it's the right answer. It's money. Like they have made a lot of money in the last 12 months, even more than probably they anticipated when it comes to just the new added revenue of having the new markets to sort of market to in Japan, understanding all the different business opportunities that having Ohtani and then also Yamamoto sort of brings. They've kind of leveraged that big time. You couple that with winning the World Series, everything that comes financially with that, like they are in a position where they had a lot of money to spend, and they sort of understood like this is where this team is at. They kind of made a promise to Shohei Ohtani and their pitch to him that he structured his contract this way for a reason, for them to keep spending, for them to keep making the team better. And I think they kind of knew the opportunity that was in front of them. And also, it kind of lined up where a lot of the guys that were out there were guys who wanted to be Dodgers. I think Blake Snell kind of said from the outset, like he kind of knew that this was probably where he was going to wind up. Obviously, he still took his meetings, still met with the Red Sox, still was taking Zoom calls with the Yankees the day he signed. But I think he kind of knew at the end of the day that this was where he wanted to be. And you sort of saw that with Teoscar Hernandez as well. And you just saw Sasaki could probably argue the same thing, maybe the same thing with Hyun-Sung Kim, just based off his comments since then. Like a lot of these guys wanted to be in LA, and I think the Dodgers were positioned that they had the money to spend, and they were aggressive, and they got the deals done.
One more question, Fabian, for you, and then we'll get to our final questions for last one or two questions following this one. It doesn't seem like there's full clarity yet what Andy Pages' role with the Dodgers will be for the upcoming season. You added Kim to the infield mix. It sounds like there's a half commitment, maybe a little further, not full commitment, but it sounds like they're leaning Tommy Edman center field. It kind of felt like they were trying to transition Andy Pages into a starting role this season, and then they signed Michael Conforto. Do you have any expectations or role for Pages this upcoming year, or is he just kind of be the fourth outfielder?
That's the way it kind of lines up right now. Obviously, like there's stuff that they can sort of figure out in the spring, and it's about figuring out, all right, how many of these at-bats you want to give to Kim versus how many of these at-bats you want to give to Andy Pages, because you could have Andy Pages play center field and move Tommy Edman to second base if you want to platoon Hyun-Sung Kim, or if Hyun-Sung Kim proves he can hit left-handed pitching and can hit big league pitching right off the bat, then maybe that closes up a little bit of opportunity for Andy Pages, but you sort of figure that out. And I think that's something that early on in the season you're going to see some fluidity to see how they handle the playing time for those two guys and sort of figure it out. I don't think they're going to put too much on Ha-Seong Kim's plate right away, just because there is such a big adjustment to Major League Baseball. And you saw even with Ha-Seong Kim, just how big of the adjustment can can be for guys coming from KBO, especially. It's a different level than MPB even is. So you're trying to figure out how to adapt offensively to a new environment, the new pitching styles going against them. So there's just going to be some room there, and I think they'll be finding a way to sort of get some at-bats. And even if it's Michael Conforto starting left field like 5 or 6 times a week, that one day a week will probably be Andy Pages in there in left field and so like that. There'll be times to get him to start a couple times a week there, at least to start the season, sort of figure it out. But yeah, he's a guy who they're pretty high on, but also you sort of saw, at least as of right now, he's still very young, can get better, but some limitations to his game over the course of last summer, where he didn't hit right-handed pitching as well down the stretch. He's probably not the best defensive fit in center field. He can play there, but he's probably a better fit, especially in right field with his arm out there. So that's a situation where there's still some stuff to be sort of fluid about. And also, there's also still Chris Taylor on the roster. So that's something that has to be sorted out as well.
I have a question, since we're talking about, roster fits and positioning and all of that. We've been talking about all offseason when we heard the news that they were considering putting Mookie Betts back at shortstop to start this season. Maybe, Fabian, if you can give us some insight as to, for lack of a better question, what the hell's going on here? Because I don't quite understand the logic of having a Mookie Betts play shortstop, despite him saying that he was, ready to do it and wanted to do it, and obviously has the work ethic to do it. But what is going on here when you have a team that is such a well-oiled machine to move a Gold Glove right fielder and one of your superstars out of position to learn a pretty important one in shortstop?
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially with how it went last year, he sort of had 2 weeks' notice to become the opening day shortstop for them. I think the hope and the plan, and I think the desire for the team is just to sort of give Mookie Betts a chance to have a full offseason working there to see if he can work through some of the things that maybe he struggled with defensively at shortstop. They felt like he got to a lot of balls that a shortstop should. They felt like he was positioned well and that he was actually making some pretty big strides there before he broke his hand. The big issue was the throwing, which is really finding the right arm slot, just because he was so used to playing the outfield after a long time. So they were thinking that spending an entire winter there like he has can sort of help close those gaps. I don't think they're necessarily fully wedded to spending the whole season with Mookie Betts at shortstop, but I think they want to start the season there. And I think they know that if it doesn't work out or in their position, they feel like they can move him back to second base. Then you can have Ha-Seong Kim play shortstop. You have other guys who are capable of playing shortstop, especially if you do sign Kike Hernandez. So you'll have other options, Tommy Edman as well. So they have ways still to pivot, but I think the way that lines up for you best offensively is probably still with Mookie Betts at shortstop, and he's probably one of the better offensive shortstops in baseball right now, as it currently stands. And that's sort of how it was last year at the time he broke his hand. Obviously, all the defensive struggles notwithstanding, he was leading all shortstops in WAR last year when he broke his hand. So there's still a lot of surplus value you get from having that kind of an offensive producer at the position. Obviously, out in June, he kind of struggled a little bit right before he broke his hand, but still overall was having a good offensive season at that time.
That makes sense to me, and we'll see how Mookie Betts adjusts to a full offseason workload and get himself acclimated at the shortstop position. So I think the last question I have for you, Fabian, before we get on out of here with and again, thank you so much for having you join us today. We really appreciate it. And for those tuning in and those listening on the audio feed, if you haven't followed Fabian Ardaya, make sure to follow him on social media and check out his coverage for the Dodgers over at The Athletic, because he gives you the best insight and up-to-date analysis of what's going on with your team. So my last question, do you think there's any more surprises, a non-roster invite, any curveballs that the Dodgers could be working on that you've heard or you could predict, see coming? Or do you think this is just it, and it's a waiting game now to see what the next move is?
I think with where we're at right now, obviously there's still a couple weeks until spring training opens. I'm sure, obviously the Dodgers are always going to be kind of opportunistic when it comes to this sort of thing. Have to see what the market kind of looks like. Who sort of is still lingering out there in February and March. And you never know if the guy's market sort of falls in a different direction than they expected. The Dodgers will be willing to sort of jump on it, but nothing super that super stands out right now, just considering how much the Dodgers have already kind of done and sort of how the pieces kind of fit right now. But obviously, a lot can change.
Awesome. Anything else, Jake?
Yeah, just I think one of our listeners wanted to know if you have any ideas to when like Roki Sasaki will be announced / when that press conference could be.
No idea yet. Obviously, I mean, there's not really much of a rush, but obviously there's a time crunch for like when this posting window officially ends, but like it's not huge like crunch in terms of time right now. Obviously, it's a situation where they kind of knew he's made his decision. They're kind of align things up, and also like it's just a matter of maybe logistics, stuff like that. So
great.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Fabian, and for everyone tuning in and listening. Again, Fabian Ardaya will be covering your Los Angeles Dodgers for the upcoming 2025 season as the Dodgers look to be the first team to repeat since the New York Yankees back in the early 2000s. So thank you, Fabian, for joining us, and we look forward to your coverage for this upcoming season.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you. All right, Jake. So it's been a minute since we've had you on. Roki Sasaki, officially a Dodger. Tanner Scott, officially a Dodger. What are your takeaways from the last few days? And if you want to sum that all up in this offseason, the floor is yours.
I don't think if you took any 2 off seasons just at random or consecutively for the Dodgers, you could come anywhere near what they've done the last 2 years. These last 2 off seasons have been the best in franchise history. It's not particularly close, especially on the heels of a World Series. I mean, even when they won in 2020, they didn't really retool that much. It was still a few years away until we got Freddie Freeman and started to really build the rest of this roster. But they kept that core intact after 2020, with Justin Turner and Cody Bellinger. And when did they get rid of Seager? Was it 22 or 21?
He left after 21.
He left after 21. Exactly. So they kept a lot of that, kept a lot of that core together after the 2020 season. And you kind of fast forward to the next few off seasons, which have been great. Like we said, they added Freddie Freeman, they added Trey Turner and Max Scherzer during a trade deadline, and even with those teams that have you could argue had World Series rosters, had a World Series roster together, it just didn't come to fruition, getting bounced in the first round in consecutive seasons, being bounced by the Padres and then the D-backs. I mean, it was a real low point for the Dodgers before they got Ohtani. And then, like we mentioned, after they win the World Series, then they are capitalizing even more because they understand that the window for this dynasty is here. And we don't know how long it's going to last for. So let's capitalize on it now and win our, San Francisco Giants titles that they won, those 3 that they won in 2010, 2012, 2014. But let's win multiple back-to-back, however many we can win. And even if they don't win those back-to-back, they're positioning themselves to win a World Series title every single year. And this is just, icing on the cake. I mean, of course, Tanner Scott, all the rest of the teams had the entire offseason to add him, and they didn't. Yeah. And only after the Dodgers announced, or they didn't announce, but after Roki Sasaki announced that he's choosing the Dodgers, did they go out and get Tanner Scott? I mean, it's unheard of. It's the best 2 off seasons I've ever experienced as a Dodger fan.
Definitely, for sure. And thank you guys for watching. Hit that like button if you haven't given us your like yet. And if you're new to the show, subscribe button goes a long way as well. So thank you guys. And if you guys have questions for us, we'll start to take questions now. Drop them below in the YouTube chat, and we'll get to some of your guys' best questions you throw at us. So I think now that the Dodgers added Tanner Scott, I do think he will be the de facto closer. And the Dodgers, if healthy, they have a really good opportunity to make these games kind of short. You get your pitcher who goes 5-6 innings if you're lucky, and then you turn to just a beast of a bullpen. Vesia could go an inning, Treinen could go an inning, Phillips could go an inning, Kopech could go an inning, and you hand that bridge over to Tanner Scott, and it should be pretty seamless most nights. And one thing that I know you despise, and hopefully we don't see a lot of this upcoming year, will be bullpen games for the Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, look, Fabian talked about it. The Dodgers are planning on going with a 6-man rotation. So if that's the case, if they have 6 starters, whether they're the starters we kind of are looking at on paper, or they're guys that come up for spot starts or whatever have you, there shouldn't be bullpen games. And I think the more rested the bullpen can be for the playoffs, the better. The Dodgers were, for a long stretch of time, after they lost Glasnow and after they lost Gavin Stone, I mean, they were really piecing games together. It was really kind of ragtag. And then they got to the playoffs and they were able to win a World Series without 4 starters. They only had 3 starters that could go, and those starters didn't even go deep into games. So they were putting a lot of tax on the bullpen, and I don't think that's very sustainable. So the way that they've set it up here, like you mentioned, Kevin, is the depth at starting pitching, depth in the bullpen. You're going to have injuries. It's inevitable. But I think that with the depth that they've added to this team, they can afford to have those injuries.
So you said the word, you threw it out there minutes ago, dynasty. And it does feel like the Dodgers are, without a doubt, building a dynasty. They have to win at least one more title, I think, and then we can actually be serious about, are the Dodgers now a dynasty? But with all these moves that they're making, they're owning the offseason. The only team that's really come close to us and actually outspended us this offseason was the Mets when they went all in on Juan Soto. But the Dodgers here with Blake Snell, Kim, bringing back Teoscar, Treinen, Scott, Sasaki, Conforto, list goes on. They are putting together a 26-man roster where it's really, really, really hard now to find a weak link. And, they say you're as strong as your weakest link. If the Dodgers can maybe cut Chris Taylor or he bounces back, which would, I guess, be the better outcome, you are looking at potentially, and we'll see what happens in the regular season, the greatest team of all time.
Certainly, that certainly could be the case. I mean, it could be the case where, if you remember all the way back in 2001 when the Mariners won a record 116 wins and then they got bounced in the first round. The Dodgers have had a couple of those seasons where they've won well over 100 games, 111 games, and then didn't go anywhere in the playoffs. I think you could see a scenario where the Dodgers win 115 or 116 games or whatever, and also win the World Series. I mean, that often does not happen, right? Where you have like a team that wins baseball and then wins the title. It's usually one or the other. I think you could see that. And if that happens, if they win over 100 games or have the most wins in Major League Baseball or even the most wins in the National League, and then go on to win the World Series, making it a back-to-back, World Series title wins, then yes, this is the greatest team of all time, or it can be in the conversation, I think, at least.
So it feels like the Dodgers are probably done making the big moves. They'll have the little things like roughing out the edges with Kike and Kershaw. When we get to spring training, what's a storyline you're looking forward to? What's a player that you kind of think could make a big impact? Basically, I'm kind of asking for a prediction here. Like, what do you want to see happen in spring training as a talking point?
Like, what am I looking forward to?
Yeah.
I'm looking for, well, obviously I talked about it with Fabian, but I'm looking forward to seeing what Mookie Betts looks like at shortstop. I think that's going to be my main focus because I want to see, like you said, okay, fine. And now he has a full off season to get ready. What does that mean in spring training? We saw when they tried Gavin Lux at shortstop, and that was something that I was laser focused on, and it was very bad. I mean, he was not a good shortstop, so much so that they could not start him there during the regular season. So I'm going to be very focused on Mookie Betts. It's also a lot like what I was focusing on last spring training, which was Max Muncy's defense at third base and how much improved that was. And it was. I mean, it really showed that he put in a lot of the work during the offseason, was ready. So I expect Mookie Betts to be a much better shortstop than he was, even despite the fact that I don't love that move. And then the other thing that I'm looking forward to is just to see who's healthy starting pitching wise. Are we going to be able to see opening day the guys that we have on paper start the season? I'm talking about, Glasnow and Yamamoto and Sasaki and Snell. Are we going to have those 4 guys ready to go? And then assuming Kershaw is signed, are we going to get to see what this rotation is made of right out the gate? Or is it going to be another one of these, slow ramp up, mid-season, we get to see where we're at. But by the time Glasnow's healthy, someone else is hurt. I would just like to see, I know we're not going to get a full healthy season from our starting pitching, because that's just wishful thinking at this point. But I would love to see what we look like at the end of spring training. Are we going to have most of our guys ready to go?
Yeah, I agree with that. So one name that I'm going to be very keen on and keep a close lookout for, Bobby Miller. Bobby Miller was at one point the Dodgers' top pitching prospect. He was a first-round pick, and in his first season, he made a pretty noticeable positive impact as a rookie. And then it just completely unraveled after his first beast of a start. 6 innings, I think it was 11 strikeouts, shutout against the Cardinals, and then just completely unraveled like yarn from the rest of the point moving forward in the season. If the Dodgers can get the better version of Bobby Miller, that's only going to make this team even stronger. We know who the veterans are. We know who the top dogs are in the starting rotation. But I want to start to have a discourse where Bobby Miller makes a name for himself, and we have to start to have serious conversations about where he is slotted in this Dodgers rotation. And so that's something I am looking on. I don't think Dodgers should trade him at all. I know that there's been some people that have completely given up on him, but I want to see the Bobby Miller bounce back. And I think from a present and future standpoint, it'll make the decisions easier. There will be less dependency on guys like Tony Gonsolin, who I still like, but I think Bobby Miller has a higher ceiling. Dustin May, who we can't really depend on because he's always hurt. And then the other guys such as Knack, Kasparius, and eventually at some point Sheehan should come back. And I'm sure I'm blanking on another lesser arm, but needless to say, I want that Bobby Miller bounce back.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the guys, other guys on the fringe that you kind of want to keep your eye on, like James Outman. What's he going to look like in spring training? He tends to kind of fool you a little bit because he does rake in spring training. He hits AAA pitching better than most people, but the problem that he's had is that he can't figure out major league pitching. And also, like you mentioned with Fabian, where does Andy Pages factor in here? What does Chris Taylor look like? Does he have his swing back, assuming he's going to be on the roster? There's so many different guys that are kind of like on the fringe where you're very curious to see what they look like in spring, how they're going to factor into the big club. Are they going to make the roster out of spring training? So there's a ton of storylines outside of, when's Shohei going to pitch, or what's Sasaki look like? How does Yamamoto look like in year 2? Obviously there's the big storylines like that, and then the other thing we're keeping an eye on is Dave Roberts' contract extension. That's something that I think needs to get done. I mean, he did the thing. He won a World Series in a full season. The players love him. We were talking about when the Dodgers were down 2-1 to the Padres. I remember talking to you about how we're like, if the Dodgers get bounced, you got to get rid of Roberts. You just have to. And what a shift has occurred. Him coming back in that series, the Dodgers coming back to win that series, the sort of quote unquote cakewalk to the World Series, kind of steamrolling through the Mets and then beating the Yankees. Now it's like, okay, so he won the World Series. Let's extend him. Let's keep him around.
No doubt about it. I don't see any questions yet. So if you don't have questions for us, then we won't answer your questions. But if you got questions for the show, drop them in the chat. Jake, I gave us some homework. I don't know if you were ready for today's show. Wanted to review some positions around Major League Baseball and review where you think these Dodger players would land. Do you have a position you wanted to start with?
No, but I think we should do is go with your list, and I'll just comment on them because I feel like we're going to have similar lists.
All right, so I'm not doing full top 10s. I kind of just go where the Dodger lands. So for catcher, I've got William Contreras, number 1, Adley Rutschman, 2, and Will Smith right now, 3rd best catcher in Major League Baseball.
Better than Real Muto.
At this point, I think Will Smith's better than Real Muto.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's right because, you look at Will Smith and he's, historically a first half kind of catcher. That's another thing. It's like, can Will Smith, sustain his offensive production for both halves of the season? Because what ended up happening is that he tailed off in the second half, was not really a factor in the playoffs, had a few moments, a few decent moments, but overall wasn't that much of a factor. So yeah, I agree with your assessment there.
Quick answer for you. Then 1988. When is Gavin Stone returning? He is out for all of 2025 as he recovers from a pretty serious shoulder injury that knocked him out late in 2024. So earliest expectations would be a 2026 return for Gavin Stone. So first baseman, I have Vladdy Jr. if he's playing the position as the best first baseman in Major League Baseball. I have Bryce Harper 2, and I have Freddie Freeman number 3.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I might move Freddie Freeman up ahead of Bryce Harper because I feel like Freddie is just a complete hitter no matter what the calendar says. And I think that for the Phillies, they really did need Bryce Harper in the playoffs this past season. He just didn't really come through as much as Freddie did. I mean, you look what Freddie did on a bum ankle. I mean, that was incredible. The fact that he was even able to play was incredible. But then you fast forward to the World Series and he has that moment in Game 1 against Nestor Cortez. I feel like Freddie Freeman should be 1 or 2 across Major League Baseball.
Second base, I didn't have anyone. I don't know where Kim would fill in yet, and I don't know if Edman is their second baseman. And since Mookie Betts is the shortstop for the time being, we'll get to him in a second when I say shortstop. Third baseman, I have Jose Ramirez 1. I think that's indisputable. Rafael Devers 2, Manny Machado 3, Austin Riley 4, Alex Bregman 5, and Max Muncy number 6. I've got him ahead of guys like Nolan Arenado right now.
Absolutely. I think that Nolan Arenado, if he had a monster season last year, offensively, we could probably move him up ahead of Max Muncy. But I agree with all the guys you mentioned are definitely ahead of Max Muncy, just based on just the complete offensive picture, not to mention the defense is better than him as well. But the thing about Max Muncy is that he's not going to, it's like, unlike Jose Ramirez, right? Jose Ramirez is the middle of the order bat, is the guy that they rely on most in Cleveland, whereas Max Muncy is a great complementary piece on this roster. You're not looking at him to provide all of the thump, just some of it. So, and he does that. He drives in runners and he hits for power and he gets on base.
Shortstop was a tough one. Bobby Witt Jr. was number 1 for me. Gunnar Henderson 2, Francisco Lindor 3, and then I was going back and forth, but I got Mookie Betts and Ellie De La Cruz in the next 2 spots, and I can't figure out who to put ahead of who right now, but needless to say, Mookie Betts 4 or 5.
Yeah, I agree with you, and like Fabian mentioned, at the time of when Mookie broke his hand, like He was leading shortstops in WAR. I think what would bump Mookie Betts up this list, because I think offensively he's probably number one, but his defense, and that's one thing I'm looking for in spring training.
And then DH Shohei Ohtani. Don't need to go into further depth on that. Right field, I've got Aaron Judge 1, Juan Soto 2, Fernando Tatis Jr. 3, Corbin Carroll, who I believe is the right fielder, is 4, Kyle Tucker, new Cub, 5, Jackson Shuria, who I think is going to break out for the Brewers, 6, Ronald Acuna Jr. 7, and Teoscar Hernandez, number 8, in right field.
Yep. I'm with you on that. I think that any other team besides the Dodgers would feature Teoscar Hernandez as probably their best hitter in the lineup. He is, again, another cog in the machine here, but he still is the middle of the order bat for this team. And again, I think what would bump him up the list a little bit more, defense.
I didn't have a Dodger for center field or left field. We'll get to pitchers in a second, but let's pivot to this question from Roy Estrada, which we'll get off topic, but I love to answer these questions. Who gets traded to make room on the 40-man roster?
Well, I think they're going to move guys to the 60-day IL before they get rid of anybody. But if they had to get rid of someone on the roster, Chris Taylor's probably the odd man out, right? I mean, I don't think there's really any other candidate on there that you would want to get rid of, because most of the pitchers are, injured, coming back from injury. You kind of want to see what you have. And if you don't have to cut them, you can put them on the 60-day IL. Why wouldn't you? And I think Fabian's right. Getting rid of Gavin Lux kind of clears the pathway for Kike Hernandez. And if it is between Kike and Chris Taylor, I'm going Kike every time. But there's a world in which they could keep both of them.
I think the Dodgers are going to move one of these starters. I just don't know which name it is yet. And I think it'll come closer to when the season, or closer to when spring training actually begins. And it'll be kind of like a AJ Pollock for Craig Kimbrell-like move, where it just kind of came out of nowhere.
Yep.
I just don't see a future where, unless we get some injuries early into spring training, where they're going to keep Tony Gonsolin, Dustin May, Landon Knack. Even I think they'll keep Ben Kasparius because he has options, but I just don't have confidence that they're going to keep those guys, especially the first two. They have a pretty extensive history now of being on the injured list. I just don't know if the Dodgers feel like they need to drag them along this year. And I do think it's going to matter.
Yeah, I think it'll matter. I think it depends on, like you mentioned, depends on how they view Dustin May. Do they view him as a starting pitcher or as a bullpen piece? And if they view him as a bullpen piece, I don't see why you would want to cut him, just to see what he has. I mean, he has electric stuff. He just can't stay on the field. So if he can stay on the field and they do want to put him in the bullpen, then there's really no reason to cut him. I think Tony Gonsolin is expendable. I don't really see, if you need to clear a roster spot, why holding on to him is that, is that crucial. You could also trade him, try and see if he has any trade value. I'm sure there's a lot of other teams looking for a starting pitcher. But again, I think that I think the idea is that you kind of want to have as much starting pitching as possible if you can keep these guys on the roster, because look what we saw last season. Pretty much every starter in our rotation got hurt. So I don't know about cutting pitching. I really would want to hold on to them if at all possible.
The X factor might be, how does Clayton Kershaw look? If Clayton Kershaw looks good and he can get going sooner rather than later, and we can't really count on Kershaw to stay healthy, we know what the Dodgers are going to do with Kershaw. They're going to give him the leeway in the front of the line pass in front of the other guys we just talked about. So that might be an X factor for what the Dodgers' decision is, because they did that last year with James Paxton. They DFA'd James Paxton to give Kershaw the rollback, and both of them ended up getting hurt and missed the year once Paxton was on the Red Sox. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Dodgers do that again. So Speaking of starting pitchers, I've got 2 Dodgers on this list. Tarek Skubal is my number 1, Zach Wheeler 2, Paul Skeens 3. I'm giving new Dodger Blake Snell number 4, Chris Sale 5, Garrett Crochet 6, and then I'll just read off the last ones. I'm bumping Yoshinobu Yamamoto up to the 7th best starting pitcher in Major League Baseball, ahead of Corbin Burns, ahead of Dylan Cease, and ahead of Hunter Green.
You think that Garrett Crochet is better than Yamamoto and Corbin Burns? I don't know about that.
I know that Garrett Crochet, we only have 1 year to work off of right now, but he was pretty disgusting for a pretty bad White Sox team. Ended up finishing with a 3.58 ERA, which isn't great, but a 2.69 FIP, which is more, I think, attributable because of the awful White Sox defense he had to play behind. And I think he's going to have a big year for Boston. I know it's an aggressive push, but I've been consistent. I'm very high on Crochet.
I know you are, but I'm just saying that Corbin Burns has won a Cy Young,
Yes.
So I mean, that's why I would not, I would bump Corbin Burns up a little bit more. And we'll see what happens in Arizona. That's going to be interesting to see. But I also think Yamamoto is better than Crochet, but we'll see. Second year, we'll see how it all pans out. And I noticed that you didn't put Glass now on there.
I don't think you can.
Yeah. I feel like he's just gotta have a healthy season in order for him to climb up that ladder. But I agree with where Snell is, and I agree with where Skeens is, and all those guys. But I feel like Crochet may be a little bit too high.
And then finally, relief pitchers. I've actually got 3 Dodgers in the top 10, and I don't think I'm biased. Emmanuel Clase is 1, Devin Williams 2, Miller. Why am I? Oh, Mason Miller.
Or no. Mason Miller, not Shelby Miller. Mason Miller.
Mason Miller of the Athletics 3, Ryan Helsley of the Cardinals 4, new Dodger Tanner Scott 5, free agent Kirby Yates 6, Raciel Iglesias, I think of Atlanta 7, Kenley Jansen 8, Dodger Michael Kopech 9, Dodger Alex Vesia 10.
I was looking up Helsley's stats. Did you mention Treinen in there?
I did not.
What?
With what Michael Kopech did for the Dodgers, I know that Treinen showed out more in the playoffs, but I think looking ahead and just off the regular season, Michael Kopech had a 1.13 ERA once he joined the Dodgers. I think he's going to flourish even more this season.
I don't know. I'm looking at this list you compiled, and I'm thinking, like, who are the guys that I would trust with my life? And I feel like Blake Treinen is one of those guys that I'd trust with my life. So I feel like he got, you gotta give him you gotta give him some more love. I think, despite where the stats line up, I think that Blake Treinen he's better than Kopech, and he's better than Vesia. He might be better than Helsley. I mean, I feel like these guys had good years, but I mean, come on. But I agree. Like, the Dodgers have so many guys in the top 10, I feel like, in relief. And I think if you look overall, who has the best bullpen in the majors, it's the Dodgers.
And what I want to say on that note is I feel like there's been 3 or 4 seasons now where one of our takeaways is that this is the best Dodgers bullpen we've seen in our lifetimes. And 2025 has a legitimate push right now to end the season becoming the Dodgers' best bullpen of our lifetimes. I expect things to go wrong. Nothing's ever perfect. There could be injuries. Someone could regress. But when you've got all those names out there for the Dodgers, it's like an all-star team bullpen. It's going to be ridiculous. And if you're the opposing team, your game plan might have to be get to the starter early or it's lights out.
Yeah, no, the games, if all of these guys are healthy and ready to go, the games are going to get a lot shorter. And if the games are a lot shorter, that means the starters are much more rested and blah, blah, blah. So it's going to be fun.
All right. So last call for questions. Going to go through some of these quickly. Craig Osterberg, where does Hunter Fiducia go? Reality is Hunter Fiducia is expendable. You only need 2 catchers on your active roster, and it's Will Smith, Austin Barnes. And if one of those guys do go down, the Dodgers have historically found guys off the scrap heap, had them in the roster for a few days or so, and then they DFA them. And I feel like for Fiducia, it's probably in his best interest to go elsewhere if he wants some major league playing time. So
Yeah.
I don't think he's a need to keep.
I don't think so either. I mean, Austin Barnes doesn't get hurt and they don't care that he can't hit. So he's going to stick around for the duration of the season.
And that's a good point by Roy Estrada. X factor, Evan Phillips. He was kind of struggling and ran out of gas at the end of the season. Evan Phillips, we were the last 2 years, I feel like, talking about as a top 10 reliever in all of Major League Baseball. And now he's kind of become the forgotten warrior and is flying a little bit under the radar. But Evan Phillips is certainly another big piece of the Dodgers bullpen, and we love him.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're big Evan Phillips fans here on the Incline, but I think for him, he may have just gotten a little too overworked, overused. He had to be the closer last season for a good chunk of it, and it's not really his role. His role is fireman, comes in any situation, can kind of wiggle his way out, and he did come back down to earth a little bit last season. There was a few human moments that we didn't really see from him in 2023, which we saw from him in 2024. Which is very uncharacteristic of what we've seen from Evan Phillips since he's come over here. So I think going back to the role that he's more comfortable in, less taxing on the arm, more of his speed, I think he'll bounce back next season.
Yeah, he wasn't even on the World Series roster, which I think you kind of forget about, but they were able to be fine bullpen wise without him, and he'll be healthy now going into the season. All right, Jake Reiner, final thoughts, any final subjects, any topics you want to quickly cover before we get on out of here?
No, I think we covered pretty much everything.
All right. Well, keeping it simple then. All right. Well, it's January 20th. We've got a few weeks until spring training. Appreciate all you guys tuning in to today's episode. And again, thank you to Fabian for joining us in the first half. If you're listening on the audio feed, make sure you hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or whatever audio platform you prefer. And if you're watching the replay over on YouTube, leave us a comment below, thoughts about the show or a prediction you've got coming that the Dodgers are going to make this remaining offseason, or react to Tanner Scott, Roki Sasaki signing with the Los Angeles Dodgers. But that's it